Right, guys, how are you doing today? Welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness Podcast. Today, I have on none other than the Bryce Lewis. For those of you guys who do not know, Bryce is one of the top lifters in the IPF. He competes the 105 kilo class. He is a coach for TSA. I believe he is the founder, actually. He has a passion for lots of different things: cooking, lifting, helping other people get strong all across the world. And he has a very unique way of looking at training and has worked with lots of great coaches in the space and collaborated with lots of the top athletes in the world. Something I've always admired about Bryce is he seems to always be continually searching for more and more knowledge and ways to improve as a coach and as an athlete to kind of get in, I guess, not only an edge for himself, but his clients as well, is what it really comes across. Something that I think that's something that you really can't fake is passion. And I think that Bryce has had a wealth of knowledge and experience during his time training that is going to be very, very valuable to all of us who are, aspiring to get stronger and just improve our overall enjoyment and longevity in the sport of powerlifting. Yeah, how are you doing, Bryce?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for that introduction. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, me too. So I guess just diving into things, I guess, how has your training been going recently? You've been posting on Instagram a few, you've been a few of what I like to call ability PRs with, especially with squat and deadlift, and trying out a new bench grip. How's that been going?
Mostly good on the bench grip. I think I tweaked my elbow slightly, trying to kind of rotate my elbows a little bit too much and bring the bar down a little bit too low with a weight that was, a little bit too heavy. I'm fine. It's just small tweak, but that's been going well. As far as strength is concerned, it's getting close to my normal levels of strength, like triples with 90% or something like that. And everything else is going well. Things are starting to get serious now that I've signed up for nationals, which is in mid-June. So that'll approach quicker than any of us could realize. And that's the plan.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. So I guess going into a little bit of your background. So you have a background of first competing with bodybuilding, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So I guess if we want to trace it back far enough, volleyball was where I first started. But as far as barbell sports, I did bodybuilding before powerlifting by a long shot.
Yeah. So what aspects of bodybuilding do you think carry over to you being an elite powerlifter?
Probably quite a few things. Number one, I think early on when you have an approach in bodybuilding to start off with, especially when you took bodybuilding seriously and you got up on stage, like I delineate bodybuilding as a training methodology from bodybuilding as a competition. And, we can learn kind of different things about each of those. But let's talk about the training as a bodybuilding first and foremost. Certainly, like going up to very high RPEs, I think you learn that you have a lot more in you than you thought you did. And that's something that can transfer over to powerlifting fairly reliably. Just how hard one is able to work, and really realizing that you can dig deeper and that there's more in you. Like I'm not sure what your training looks like, but I've had a few kind of defining moments for me in the past where I've done just a ridiculously hard set of leg press or rack pulls or RDLs or like any of these exercises, and just realizing that you actually can get out that 9th rep, that 10th rep that you didn't really think you had, and you can show up to training in a relatively dieted state and still put your best foot forward, and kind of you learn these lessons throughout time of really what you're capable of. And I think those carry forward throughout all of your endeavors in sport and even in non-sport, to be honest.
I think that's something that I notice a lot with bodybuilders versus powerlifters, because I noticed that there's a big trend in powerlifting seems to be a more sub-max for good reason. We have some decent data showing that the 2 repetitions closer to failure, the final 2 ones, are disproportionately fatiguing relative to the stimulus. but I would, you said you didn't know what my training looks like. I mostly, what my coach does, I kind of come from, so he interned under Chad Wesley Smith. So, a lot of the juggernaut training style is bodybuilding oriented, except for 6 to 8 weeks out of meet, since Chad likes to follow the typical block periodized model. Um, but yeah, I would definitely say that in my personal experience, I do believe that it's different pushing like a squat to failure versus like a leg press, though. So I guess in terms of that, when you made the transition to powerlifting, what changed mainly about your training in terms of how you had to approach it from a mental side of things? Because I think that there's like in my personal experience, there's been definitely a different dynamic. When I have a 5 by 5 or something like that, versus I have a 3 by 10 on something. It's just a different mindset in my opinion. But I wanted you to
Yeah.
what you think about that.
Yeah, I would say even back when I was doing bodybuilding style training, like I still was doing squatting, benching, and deadlifting. In fact, I was doing fairly low reps, nothing close to what I'm doing in powerlifting now, but there would be sets of 5, there would be hard sets of 5 and aiming to push load. Just the difference being aiming to push load as a vehicle for hypertrophy rather than pushing load because you care about your 1 rep max a whole lot, and I really enjoyed that part of my bodybuilding training. And that's one of the things that made me want to try powerlifting. It's like, oh, you get to do the heavy lifts and you don't have to diet as hard. Well, that's fantastic. Let's do more of that. Um, so like there wasn't a dramatic change that had to happen. The first powerlifting approaches that I can really remember running were like a West Side kind of approach. And I think before that, honestly, we did I think the West Side approach came first, and then we briefly did some Shaco stuff after that. The Shaco stuff is a pretty dramatic departure from traditional um, bodybuilding training, at least. But the West Side stuff was basically like do a bodybuilding approach and then add heavy lifting before you do any of that stuff. So once a week on squat, bench, and deadlift, go up to something heavy, and then another time a week, do a bunch of work at something very light. And then after that, do a bunch of bodybuilding stuff. And that's basically the West Side approach that we ended up running, at least. And so I was fairly prepared for that and just really latched on to some of the heavy work.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, you talked about Westside and Shago, and those who are familiar with the two systems, I would argue that Westside is a much more low volume approach in terms of specificity on comp lifts, as opposed to Eastern Bloc style of training with Shago. What do you say that your powerlifting training, since you are more of an elite level powerlifter, is more similar to a Shago program right now in terms of specificity? Maybe not in terms of frequency and absolute volume directed towards the competition lifts. But
Mm-hmm. If we had to imagine a scale between West Side on the one side and Shaco on the other side, I would pretty much put myself smack in the middle between the two right now. Um, and the reason I say that is because even the West Side training I was doing was slightly higher specificities, so we weren't doing a ton of stuff with safety bar and box squats and partial range of motion and things like that. And yeah, it's funny. Like I see those now as just kind of like these subtle details in between. Like I think it's important if you training is just you have 4 knobs in front of you on a control dashboard. You've got volume, intensity, frequency, and exercise selection. And like every approach I can think of has slightly different twists of those knobs. And that's kind of how you navigate that space. And so Shaco's training is fairly high specificity, fairly high volume, exercise selection, which is another way to say specificity is pretty high. Training frequency is moderate, training volume, and that's all of them. And on the other end of the spectrum, I guess the shift for West Side is toward lower volume, toward higher intensity, and toward more exercise variation. But like that's kind of one way of understanding these. My own current training, just kind of putting it in less abstract terms, I'm usually squatting 2 to 3 times per week. I'm usually deadlifting 1 to 2 times per week, and I'm benching 3 to 4 times per week. After my main lifts, I go and do a fair amount of what probably looks like bodybuilding training, stuff in the 8 to 12 rep range at, moderate RPEs, aiming to add more weight to what I did last week over a number of exercises that help me get bigger.
Yeah. So thank you so much for answering all those. That's great insight. I guess in terms of that, because you said that you started with West Side, um, and then did more shakeout demos. Because if I remember correctly from what Eric Helms has said, he when he first was coaching you, you were just doing more of a template style approach, and then once Eric got more comfortable actually programming, then you kind of things started to change a little bit. So I guess how has your training evolved over time in terms of are there things that worked well from the beginning that still work very, very well right now? And what things have had to really change as you've gotten to these elite levels, where every, 2 kilos on a bench press is massive.
Yeah. It's funny. You're right that Eric kind of started off using templates, and we were both kind of running experiments on each other because I was brand new to powerlifting and he was brand new to powerlifting coaching. And so a lot of it was just kind of learning from trial and error and, well, this worked and that worked and stuff like that. I wasn't big on any new ideas or bringing a whole lot to the table because I didn't have a background in coaching powerlifting either. And so I was just kind of learning from the athlete side and just saying, look, I'll do whatever you put in front of me and we'll see how it goes and make some adjustments from there. Even today, I'm fairly hands off when it comes to my own training outside of, a few small pieces of input here and there, or like, I want to do leg press and, I feel like I want to do lunges right now. And, he'll find a way to input that in the training approach. As far as patterns on what things have worked really well over time for us, I think when we settled on a rough training frequency and a rough training layout, it's fairly daily undulating periodized across days and fairly linear across weeks with a deload every fourth week. There's no surprises to that basic approach. And then one of the days is fairly heavy, somewhere in the 1 to 5 rep range. And the other day is usually fairly higher training volume. That's been fairly stable. And the only thing that's really gone up is the weight on the bar and not really the number of sets that I've been doing. So I rarely do 4 or more sets on any particular training day per movement. RPE is probably right in that sweet spot of 6 to 8. Anytime I'm above that in 8.5 to 9 too often, my body starts to tell me, hey, this isn't a good idea. Anytime I'm below that, we're really not making progress. And so that's been the sweet spot for 6 years or something like that.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of your overall training approach, so it sounds like obviously deadlift is less than squat and bench. How do you what have you noticed in terms of programming works well for, I guess, each of the lifts? Because um like you're very, very good at basically everything. Like I think that's something that's really impressive to me. Just looking, it seems like you're just a very, very even lifter in terms of, there's not a huge delineation between lifts that's, like, holy cow, like this is a glaring weakness. Um, since you've had a ton of experience with coaching and whatnot, I would guess would you mind going in a little bit more in depth on what you found works really, really well for something like the deadlift, squat, or bench press in terms of, I guess, um, mainly from the scope of volume and intensity across
Sure.
the week?
Yeah, absolutely. For deadlift, compared to the other lifts, usually a little bit less volume tends to be required to make progress. And if you push volume a little bit too high, it tends to interfere with progress on the other lifts. So by that token, typically athletes are deadlifting a little bit less than they would for the other lifts. Either that's one less day per week, that's one less set per day, one less rep at the same intensity compared to what or other lifts might be using. And then outside of that, a lot of the progression really depends on like lifters' leverages and what they look like. So the training for like a highly efficient sumo deadlifter might look different than a conventional deadlifter that's fairly leaned over in the lift. And the movements that you choose for each one of those is really on a case-by-case basis. But generally speaking, more hamstring work might be better for someone who is a conventional deadlifter that's more leaned over, which makes sense because the hamstrings are a little bit more taxed in that particular movement pattern. And then for a highly efficient sumo deadlifter that's pretty upright, a lot of quad work, a little bit of back work, a fair amount of posterior chain work, glutes and low back. That's going to help them progress pretty well. But outside of that, it's really just kind of about setting reps moderate and kind of progressing that forward.
So more of a, I guess, if you were to add in a secondary day, because obviously you're going to go heavy about once per week in order to satisfy the overload threshold dynamics. For the secondary day, does that look more like as you approach a competition? Obviously we get more of a specificity with probably just doing like more of a lighter day, then maybe further out from competition, like an RDL or a glute hammer raise or something like that.
Maybe. And the reason I'm so wishy-washy about this is for two reasons. Number one, we always want to follow training response. So let's pretend that you are 50 weeks out from a competition, or let's pretend an athlete doesn't even have a competition. They like powerlifting, but they don't have any desire to compete. So you set them up on a training approach. They're making great progress over time, and they continue to make great progress over time. And by that I mean their estimated 1 rep maxes continue to climb, and they're hitting rep PRs. Even though you're not doing a 1 rep max, they're hitting rep PRs and breaking their rep PRs and breaking those rep PRs and so on. That's great progress. If you happen to find an approach like that you've created for an athlete, I don't see a whole lot of a reason to change that. Whatever the conventional wisdom says about increasing specificity toward a competition, or needing a peaking phase or anything like that, you have found a great approach for this particular lift at this particular time. So keep doing that until it stops working. And the other reason I am a little bit hesitant about this is because the definition of an off season versus a meet prep in powerlifting is a lot more wishy-washy than it might be for other sports. Certainly the farther out from competition you are, you may want to use some higher reps, maybe a little bit more exercise variation, potentially. But this idea of like only going light or only using high reps when you're far out from a competition doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. We're powerlifters, so we need to train low reps and we want to get stronger. And I was just talking to an athlete about this the other day. Like, I forget whether it's a free program that Juggernaut put out or something from the AI approach that they were using, but it's like a 20-week approach, and you do a block of 10s, a block of 8s, block of 6s, and then finally, when you're within striking distance of the competition, we finally get down to singles. Like if you zoom out and look at like a whole year of doing something like that, you may be touching singles 4 to 6 weeks out of the year, and you may be touching triples and under, a fraction above that. And I think that's just fairly low specificity on the movements and the strength systems that we care about as powerlifters, and luckily enough, there is no competition season in powerlifting. It's not like baseball where you've got, 20 games all together. Your competitions are spaced relatively evenly. And so I think there's more merit to practicing heavier lifts year round. Now, this isn't really the same argument that you would use for like, doing singles every week, or, even a single at 6 every week, but some kind of low rep, moderate RPE practice and some kind of exposure to say, yes, we're pushing loads is a really good idea. And I don't see the reason to stay away from heavy loads for, 12 weeks out of a 20-week training cycle.
I really, really like everything that you just brought up there, because that's something that I have noticed as well in my own experience with just training, because I have had experience. I've done linear periodization. I've done more of an undulating approach, and I've done more of a block periodization approach. And I've found that for myself, I guess your point about we are powerlifters. We care about getting stronger, and in order to develop the neural qualities of a 1 rep max or something like that, it probably makes sense to have, sets of one to three. Obviously, one having the highest specificity, but twos and threes also taxing the most similar biological systems that have the most transference to a 1 rep max. Um, I guess it sounds more like an emerging strategies approach with, if it works, it works. You shouldn't just be married to one dogma or one ideology with the training program, since we change over time. We don't always have the same training response. We are not simple systems. We are complex. And I guess looking back at my own training history, which is, it's not as long as yours. But I've always found that if I can do some sort of exposure to, like, even if it's just like a single at like 6, and then I do 5s or something like that on a bench press, as opposed to only doing 5s and not having that single exposure. When I come back, it's just like I might actually have the strength still, but there's always this lag time. And when I had Eric on the podcast, he was talking about how we can take these models and these constructs and mold them to the individual, with, explaining the purpose of DUP and a block periodization model was to truncate the blocks, help make transitions easier. And I know that Eric has said that he had something that he's been doing a lot with some of his athletes, like you and Jessica, is he likes including some sort of a single at 6 or 7 year round. It seems like what he's been saying recently. So I guess going into that, I guess your whole thought process when getting a training plan to an athlete and finding an approach that works for them long term, what does that look like then? What goes into your thought process? Because you're starting from a new person, you know nothing about them. Maybe they have some training experience, but they haven't really tracked their response. Maybe they send you like a basic program that they did in the past.
Mm-hmm.
How would you go about finding what works for that athlete well?
Yeah. So I really just roll the dice and I put down, whatever numbers that come up on the dice. No, we ask for an application from each athlete, and that has some information about their age, what their training has looked like in the past, what equipment they have access to, their upcoming competition schedule, their nutrition experience, a few things about mental health, what kind of big stressors are in their life, and that serves as the basis for a conversation that we have with the athlete. So we'll get on the call, like I'm on a call with you right now, and I'll have the application open here and a big page to take some notes, and I'll just start asking some questions. Oh, what did you mean by that? Oh, what was training like for the last year? And I'll just kind of fill in a few details to get me some more information on them. But a few particular questions that have been very helpful for me is, can you think of any particular exercise or training modality that worked really well in the past for you? Things that you would want to see in your training going forward. Because especially early on, I don't know a whole lot about the athlete. And so I'm leaning rather heavily on their own experience and their memories of what's worked well for them, at least as a starting point. So I'll ask, was your training approach high volume? Do you have any examples of training approaches where you were really successful recently? Why are you seeking a coach? What kind of progress do you make on a training cycle to training cycle basis? And one of the questions that I started asking about a year ago that has been really, really helpful for me is I find that a lot of people differ on their load performance when it comes to higher rep stuff. So I'll give you 2 examples. I've got some athletes who tend to do a set of 6 at like 70 to 75%, and that's difficult for them. And then I have other athletes who are like a whole 5% shifted. Their window is somewhere like 77 to 82% for a set of 6 is like difficult for them. Well, that's really important to know, because if I don't know that, For one athlete, I'm going to program them like deathly hard work. And for the other athlete, I'm going to program them stuff that's too easy, that we're really not progressing. And so that question particularly has allowed me to skip a lot of early gaffes and get on a program that's more suited for the athlete much earlier than I would have otherwise. So, I ask these questions, I get enough information, and it starts somewhere reasonable for an athlete. And I just kind of go based on general assumptions. So it's probably a good idea to have a deload every 3 to 5 weeks. It's probably a good idea to start off with an intro week to kind of assess and see what the athlete's going through. Probably a good idea to start a little bit below where you might normally as far as load selection, just to have like a safe week to start off with and see where you go with for the athlete. And then just kind of continue to add and modify a little bit at a time as you learn and get to know the athlete better and better.
I think that's interesting how you talked about how different athletes have a different response to different loading ranges, with high reps or low reps. My deadlift is a perfect example of this because I suck at reps compared to my singles and doubles. Like I'm the athlete who, if I 70-75% for sixes, it's really hard for me on deadlift. And honestly, across the board on really everything except for bench press, I seem to be like that.
Yeah,
Um, so how has your you have a background in philosophy, correct?
I do.
So I know that you're really into more of like the social model of coaching. How does that, I guess, influence your how you program for a client? So, for example, would you give a client who thrives more off of adrenaline, more heavy singles for their in their training that makes things more involved, more excited about their training? Maybe they, and maybe even, top that off. Obviously, let's say like they respond really, really well to that. It seems to just drive because, for example, for me on deadlift, I found that if I don't need a lot of volume. If I can get in a heavy single and like a couple higher intensity top sets, I'm golden. A lot of that has to do with my whole. I love deadlift. I love going heavy on it. It's my favorite lift. Whereas with somebody who's more conservative, would you? I guess how would you frame their training? Because I've had experience with coaching some clients who you have to rein them in a lot, and other ones it's you have to tell them no, like you can do this, like you can absolutely do this. It's going to feel hard, it's going to feel heavy on your back, but I have full confidence that you can do this. So I guess how does the athlete psychology play into how you program?
Yeah, good question. Really not directly. It's not as cut and dry as giving an athlete a survey and saying, "Do you want to go heavy?" Great. Well, we're going to go heavy. Um, there is this test called the Big Five, which is kind of like a general personality survey, and has something to do with across most situations how an athlete is likely to respond in situations in their life. There's extroversion, agreeableness, and three other traits that are unimportant right now. But mostly the sports psychology stuff shows up in problem solving. When an athlete is going through dips in motivation or having trouble getting the confidence to get under a barbell for a specific weight or something like that. I would be hard pressed to come up with like a prescriptive style of training people based on psychology. Probably it'd be better to do like if I really could, let's talk about a perfect world here. We'd have athletes have a testosterone, like an acute testosterone response test after like a 3-week block of training. And then there's a great study on this, and you just kind of compare the training approaches and figure out which one had the highest acute salivatory testosterone response and do that one rather than a psychology survey. That said, you can still get some really good information, but rather than having surveys and questionnaires and stuff like that, honestly, just conversation is a really good way to attack some of those things. You can just ask athletes some very direct questions. How are you feeling about your training? Are you nervous? What are your thoughts as you're going through this process? And conversation is our most intimate tool when it comes to psychology. It's talking about our feelings, basically.
Mm-hmm. So lots of just athlete communication and making sure that they're doing okay with the training.
Yeah, exactly right.
So I guess for your mindset with training then is you mentioned the highs and the lows. Um, how have you handled the dips and the wanes in progress? Because let's say you just hit this plateau, or even your strength just seeming to just regress. You're starting to just really to dislike the gym. You have no idea what's going wrong because this past training approach worked so well. How would you go about troubleshooting that in terms of programming and psychology?
Yeah, that has happened to me, and that's happened to the athletes that I work with. You know, both if you work with enough athletes and if you work with one athlete for long enough, things like that are bound to come up. Smooth, steady progress is a rare thing in the world of powerlifting, especially for all three lifts. So you might have one trouble lift that's just not progressing for whatever reason, whether it's injury or um, technique issues, or you just haven't quite figured out the programming strategy that allows that lift to progress. Um, Sometimes you handle it gracefully and you're able to talk to a coach in a pretty reasonable way and say, this is what I'm feeling, and these are the things that I think we want to change, or this is where my head's at right now. And sometimes you just sit in the corner and cry a little bit and just let it out. And powerlifting is like this big macho sport and stuff like that, but I think um, oftentimes it's neglected how human we really are in this sport. And I don't want to lose that piece for people, or make it like not okay to just express your feelings and to show your frustration and feel that kind of thing, because we all go through that, and it's okay, and we'll all get out the other side and be better off for it. But yeah, back to the point of how to get through it. I think for athletes, feeling supported in that moment and feeling like we're just going to try more things. Here we have a plan, we have next steps. I think all of that is really, really important. So shifting focus instead of kind of wallowing in the feeling. Once you've let it out, once you've done expressing it, to shift to a more results oriented mindset, and let's figure out what the next thing is that we can change. Okay, here's a summary of what we think is going on right now. As a response, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to follow up on that, in this time. So just kind of switching to as much of a frame that supports the next thing, the next way to try, and so that athletes can kind of keep motivated and continue to apply themselves in sport.
That's really interesting to me because you talked about results versus process oriented goals. So, and most of the time, this is a trap that I recently fell into, is I was becoming so results oriented all the time. I was just not enjoying my training. It was always, I want to hit X weight today, and then let's say, for every reason, I just don't have that in me. I would get really frustrated and really down on myself. Um, so I guess with in terms of process versus results oriented goals, you mentioned a shift in framing of that circumstance of when you are in a bad spot with training. Maybe your training session didn't go as well as it did, and this is something I developed a better ability to do. I feel like the longer that you do train, you understand there's going to be fluctuations in progress over time. Um, Shifting to, oh well, next time we'll be better, and oh well, and at least I did what was right, and I hit the RPE. I'm going to focus on what I can do instead of what I can't do or what I wanted to do, because hey, I wanted to do that today. It wasn't in the cards, and I actually just talked about this in a YouTube video that I uploaded. Something that I've seen with a lot of newer powerlifters, and I would consider myself a novice as well, is trying to force progress and trying to, I guess, overshoot RPEs because you want to impress in Instagram. You care about having something to share right now, and instead of getting better in the future. And that kind of goes into what I found is a vortex of fatigue. that you just kind of, and for just frustration because your training just feels hard. It's really hard. You're never actually working with your body. And I know that Sam Calhoun, she made a post that really resonated with me about herself going through similar experience where she was in that mindset of social media lifting, about caring about, well, 315 sounds cooler than 305, or God forbid, 310 on pounds. And she would basically sacrifice her long-term progress for having something to share right now. I guess, how do you get athletes to buy into the process of becoming good powerlifters versus just training for, I guess, Instagram? Because I think that has a lot to do with where we drive our validation from, personally. But I think that's something that I've seen it happen time and time again with my own clients and my own training experience.
Yeah. In my experience, the number of people who really live for Instagram, or like the number of people who adjust their training to hit something just so they can post it, is pretty small, actually, now that I think about it. It's certainly there. There's certainly those people who go off program like just to do something so they can post it and feel good about it, but it's not a big proportion of people. That said, I'm sure that there are so many other influences of social media. So for instance, almost no one posts their bad training sessions, because we all want to highlight the good stuff, and we want to hide the bad stuff away because it's not worth sharing, doesn't make us feel good. So there's this positivity bias of only posting the good stuff. That certainly has effects on athletes. And there's this other kind of pressure of needing to come up with like a point to your training session rather than week 3 day 4. Like that's really all the explanation you need. But like there's this pressure now to like have a lesson for every training session, or like a motto or a goal or something like that, rather than just one day out of 500 training days that you're going to do. And so that's certainly a pressure as well. If you find that athletes are going off program, that to me feels like a breakdown of communication, and a disconnect between goals. And that may warrant a more serious conversation as time goes on, to just kind of reframe exactly what the athlete values, why they value it, and that their training is the type of thing that is going to get them to that ultimate goal, or do they feel like training needs to change in some meaningful way? So, I mean, certainly if things go off the rails too much, a good heart-to-heart conversation is valuable.
Have you found, I guess, how would you go about a conversation like that within an athlete?
Yeah. So Adam, I'm going to pretend you are the athlete who's going off program, and we'll schedule a call, because it's just a little bit easier kind of talking about things face to face than going back through messages every now and then. Or you might just want to mention it in like a video update is one convenient way. But I find that like it's so hard to read emotion through pure typing that I tend to avoid that, as far as especially touchy stuff like this kind of stuff. But we'll talk, and we'll be like, Adam, I saw that you hit that single that was supposed to be at 6, and I saw you went all the way up to an 8. I'm just kind of wondering why you did that. And no harm here. It's not like I think less of you as a person, but look, we've got an actual training test coming up in 4 weeks. This is just kind of one stepping stone on the way to that, and I want to make sure you're prepared for that single down the road. So we want your training to support your long-term goals. And situations like this, while one time really isn't going to hurt you, like a single at 8, big deal. We're not done with powerlifting, and you're not going to hurt yourself doing that. But I want to make sure that we're both on the same page as far as what your training looks like now and how your training is supporting your long-term goals down the road. If you feel like training needs to change, let me know. We can talk about that easily. We'll incorporate some ideas and stuff like that. But on the whole, I want you to try to hit the training approach that I'm putting in front of you. You're paying me to create some training for you. We've got some trust back and forth between us, so let's see if we can build on that.
I like that. So kind of, I guess if I could break down like what I felt from that was hey man, so this is the whole point of my approach. One, you are paying for this. We have something in the future this is supposed to set you up for it. Obviously, and then you're just like reaffirming to them, like, I'm not mad. I just explained to you like why the training was laid out in this way. And then, maybe I guess in my mind, it was, oh yeah, coach, like I just, it sounded really cool. I wanted to do it. Or, oh yeah, I overshot for sure. Or I had a bad day and I wanted to go a little bit heavier to release some of that aggression. Um, and I guess just kind of go back and forth about, um, you know, because I actually have had this with my coach, because I have gone off program like any athlete, but I said, like, can we put in some singles, like some maximal singles, because I really like doing them. I just enjoy them. I feel like they could make me more confident. And we've been doing it that for this past strength cycle, and it's the first time we've done it consistently for weeks, and it's been great. So I guess adjusting the training approach could, I guess, come out of that. But probably it's more about getting them to actually buy in to what you're doing again.
Yeah. You brought up a really good point, and that's about not assuming that you know why the athlete went off program. Like you mentioned 3 or 4 reasons why the athlete might have gone off program. Maybe it was a pure good intentioned overshoot. Maybe they had a ton of stress in their life and something they thought was going to be easy was actually difficult. Maybe they actually did go off program intentionally, just to put on 315 or whatever the weight was for the gram. And like, until you talk about it, it's safe not to assume that you know exactly what the athlete is going through, and on the other side of it, training is flexible enough to accommodate most needs from what the athlete wants, to be able to put into their training program. Like, no training approach is so dogmatic that you have to be fixed on any particular anything, number of reps, exercise, RPE, and stuff like that. And if an athlete really has a good idea, I don't see a whole lot of reason to not bring it into the picture.
Yeah, that's something I've always told my athletes and clients is, hey, are you enjoying training? Are you enjoying it? What do you think? What have you liked about this? What haven't you liked about this? I'll get feedback from some of my clients who say, like, yeah, man, like I really like the more block periodized approach, because I do have some clients who respond really well to that. I have some clients who, I'll always keep at least 3 sets of 1 to 5 reps year round on squat, bench, and deadlift. Other clients, they really want that mental break, and I'll give them 5 to 10 on this comp lifts. Maybe only have like a top set at 5 and then do back downs at 7, with 7s. But yeah, I guess it's just kind of comes down to finding out what the athlete is going through, understanding their context. And I guess this is a good branching off question into, I guess, your overall, what goes into being a really good coach and helping people along the way. Because something I'm very adamant about is, no pun intended, is that coaching is not programming. It's not just assigning training and telling the athlete good luck. Hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully this works. A lot of it is about communication and whatnot. And I personally do a lot of video calling. I do a lot of phone calls with clients, and I do weekly asynchronous video check-ins as opposed to just text communication, because I have found that helps me actually be able to create a connection with the athlete. And I think that online coaching, one of the biggest pitfalls to it is it doesn't feel personal a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the times. I know with a lot of coaches, it's just, here's my phone number, you can text me. Like, hey, can we call? No. So what goes into, I guess, being a good coach and helping clients achieve their goals?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you're right to see that difference between programming and real coaching. I see programming as one aspect of coaching as a whole, and there's this almost inverse relationship between the amount of time that you spend on each individual athlete and the amount of money that you can potentially make as a coach. Like, there's only so many hours in the day, and so you may be in a situation where you're sacrificing time for each athlete versus putting a roof over your head and actually being able to make a living out of this. But I think for the most part, Most coaches are well under and beneath that. It's funny you asked this because I'm in the middle of writing the first lecture for our internship program for these new interns that we picked out, and it's the first section on kind of values. Like we spend maybe the first four before we ever get into any kind of programming topics talking about values and philosophy and coach athlete relationships and things like that, because we view those as more fundamental than the numbers on a page that an athlete goes in and actually puts together. And so, I have this definition of a powerlifting coach that I made a few hours ago. And it's the athlete-focused problem solver whose expertise lies in making all athletes stronger in the squat, the bench, and the deadlift across the short and the long term. Such expertise covers a vast array of sub-skills covering biology, kinematics, exercise science, psychology, and game day tactical information at a theoretical and a practical level. Coaches are educators who play a necessary supportive role for athletes at all stages of development. One role of a coach is to help build good people who are fulfilled and thriving. So it's more than just numbers. It is supporting them in their journey, not yours, and helping them through the highs and the lows along the way.
I really like that. So I guess in terms of identifying values as a coach, what do you mean when you say that? Do you mean you're more focused on the X's and the O's, or more of the interpersonal relationships? Because I know that like they're both important, obviously, but I guess could you more, I guess, elucidate that further?
Yeah. So basically, if you had to come up with your mission statement, or what are the things that you care about? Like, what is your driving philosophy when it comes to why you're a powerlifting coach and why you want to work with people? What are you doing all this for? Do you like the numbers? Do you like living vicariously through athlete successes? What is your reason for doing all this? And we're asking the interns to kind of answer that question and come back with something. And I think that kind of helps narrow why you want to be a powerlifting coach at all. And the answers to some of these things are really interesting, and we're getting those throughout the day. They have a homework assignment due tomorrow on this kind of stuff, but it's really it's stuff having to do with being a good communicator, about showing empathy with what athletes are going through, about being data driven, about supporting athletes at all levels, and a range of different characteristics that really transcend powerlifting. That these are true of any sport, really.
I really like that, because I think that's a big part of coaching, because I think that a lot of people will get into this, and they'll say, or they'll think, I want to be a powerlifting coach, but they haven't actually identified why, other than like it might just sound like fun, and more it's quote unquote easy money, which I did disagree with. I think if you're coaching correctly, it's definitely a lot of work, but it's the most fulfilling thing, I guess. Why do you coach? Like what is, like, why is it for you? You mentioned living vicariously through athletes or success, but was it for you?
Yeah, probably a few things. I've I really like a lot of the problem solving around coaching. So if athletes are making easy progress, that's great and fun. Um, but when there are challenges, it's almost like little puzzles to solve. And yes, you get to experience the athlete's successes with them and see their celebration and know that you were one small part of that, and that feels really good too. Um, I would say that when it comes to the athletes giving me updates and talking about things with me, I tend to enjoy hearing about and relating to like their experience of going through the training process, and that teaching them things that they are able to apply in the rest of their life. Like, I didn't know I could work that hard, and that's kind of like a lesson that they're able to apply in the rest of their life, or um, teaching them to kind of think for themselves and figure things out for themselves and have this level of athlete autonomy, that now they have this newfound sense of confidence in themselves that they've never felt before. Like, those kind of things are awesome. Like, the progress is great. I love the progress, but I I'm not too particular if I'm working with a world champion or whether I'm working with, a ranked novice. And that's because these qualities are things that I care about a little bit more than, the pounds on the bar or, showdowns on a world stage and crunching numbers for attempt selection. Like I'm down with those things too, but that isn't really what drives me to be a powerlifting coach.
Yeah, sounds like you really value the interpersonal relationships and the I guess the critical thinking aspect of coaching. Um, I would say that's something that I definitely resonate with. I'm not as much about the numbers as well. I'm sure that you've had countless testimonials from your clients and whatnot. And, what I always say is, pulling a certain number or whatever, that's awesome. What makes it special is the process. And I think that's something that's rewarding for me is, the problem solving and also just helping them become better people in general through coaching. I think that Jen Thompson and Matt Gary talk a lot about this. They said that for them, coaching is about, especially powerlifting coaching, is about making them stronger people through powerlifting. And that's my why personally. I have found that to be the case with powerlifting. You learn so much from it, and I think that as a coach too, I'm sure that you relate. You relate to this even more than I do. It's helped me become a better person and more
Mm-hmm.
empathetic and better at listening and understanding points of view. Um, so yeah, I think that's really 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 special.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess going forward, Bryce, what are your goals for 2021 with powerlifting and TSA and just to close
On the
things off?
on the personal side of things, winning nationals would be icing on the cake after how strong everyone seems to have gotten. So putting my best foot forward in training, busting my ass, and seeing what we can do on the platform come June. On the personal side, I'm moving in a month into a house that we bought for the first time, so that's really exciting, and that'll be a whole new chapter of my life. And then um, on the business side of things, there's a few things. So we're working on this low-cost coaching resource that we want to provide for everyone, just to get more people more access to good coaching more of the time. And this internship program will run in and through June, and that'll occupy a fairly large chunk of our time. So focusing a lot on that.
Awesome. I'm sure that that'll be exciting for the listeners and more people that want to work with TSA, making your coaching more accessible. Um, so, anyways, Bryce, I want to thank you so much for coming on and being willing to chat uh, about powerlifting and all of these sub topics. Where can people find you?
Well, our website is thestrengthathlete.com. You can find out all about our coaching and also some free resources that we put out there as well. And then I post my training and my own thoughts on my Instagram account at Bryce_TSA. And when things finally calm down, I love to get back to posting more YouTube content, which is really a joy. I just hit a hard wall with an imposter syndrome and feeling like I was never good enough. And these perfectionist tendencies got the better of me. But you can find the YouTube account by just searching my name, Bryce Lewis.
Yeah, that last mock meet video was pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, you do a great job with those. So
Oh, thanks, man.
I'll have all of that info down in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on, Bryce, and thank you guys for listening. We will see you on the next one. Take care.